Human buys a house and stumbles upon his three alien neighbors bathing in the river HFY. Elliot Parker had never imagined that moving to a small town would change his life so drastically. He had grown tired of the noisy city, the endless traffic, and the constant rush of deadlines. So when he found a modest house for sale on the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by mountains and a river, it felt like the perfect escape. It was a place where he could finally breathe, where he could start fresh. The house itself was nothing extravagant, but it was charming in its own way. A faded blue paint on the walls, a small porch that overlooked the sprawling fields and tall trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was tucked away from the rest of the world, as though the house had been forgotten by time. Elliot loved it instantly, and after some haggling with the realtor, he signed the papers and moved in. The first few days were blissful. He spent his time unpacking boxes, cleaning the dusty corners of the house, and imagining a peaceful future. The air was crisp, the sky endless, and every evening the soft hum of the nearby river would lull him to sleep. There was something soothing about the constant flow of water. It reminded him of simpler times, times when he could sit by a river and think, without the weight of the world on his shoulders. One morning, after finishing his breakfast, Elliot decided to explore the area. He wanted to get to know the land around his new home. With a bottle of water in hand and a small backpack on his back, he ventured out toward the river. The sun had just started to climb the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the land. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air smelled faintly of pine and fresh earth. As he walked deeper into the woods, he marveled at how quiet it was. There were no sounds of passing cars or people shouting in the distance. It was just him, the trees, and the steady murmur of the river. The woods felt alive in their own way, as if they were holding secrets that only those who listened carefully could understand. The river, at first, had appeared to be just a gentle stream. But as Elliot wandered closer, it grew wider and the current stronger. He followed its edge, stepping carefully over rocks and fallen branches when something strange caught his eye. A faint light flickered among the trees. It was like a soft glow, almost otherworldly. Intrigued, Elliot moved closer, his curiosity getting the better of him. He was careful not to make a sound, crouching low behind a large rock that jutted out from the earth. His heart beat faster, but it wasn't out of fear. It was excitement. This was something new, something he hadn't seen before. What he saw next left him speechless. In a secluded part of the river, bathed in the golden light of the morning sun, three figures stood in the water. At first glance, they looked human. But something about them was completely different. Their skin shimmered, glowing softly like polished metal. It was as if they were made of light and substance at the same time. Their hair, or what Elliot thought was hair, floated around their heads, drifting like tendrils of smoke. The three beings seemed to be engaged in some sort of ritual. They moved gracefully, with a fluidity that was unnatural to human eyes. They didn't walk or wade through the water as humans would. Instead, they seemed to glide, their movements synchronized in a way that felt both calming and hypnotic. It was like watching something from a dream, surreal and beautiful. Elliot's breath caught in his throat. He knew he should leave. He knew he should turn and run back to the safety of his house. But his legs refused to move. His mind raced with questions, none of which he could answer. Who were they? What were they doing here? Before he could decide on his next move, one of the figures turned toward him. It was a woman, or at least, that's what Elliot assumed. She had the most striking eyes he had ever seen, deep, almost violet, with a light that seemed to flicker behind them. She didn't seem surprised to see him. Instead, she smiled, a soft, knowing smile as though she had been expecting him. For a moment, Elliot thought he was dreaming. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. But the figures were still there. And they were looking at him, directly at him. The woman lifted her hand in a gesture that felt welcoming, yet somehow commanding. There was no hostility in her expression, only calm curiosity. Elliot's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he should run, but his body refused to obey. He stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee and the undeniable pull of the unknown. His mouth went dry as the woman stepped forward, her body still floating above the water. She was closer now, and her glowing skin seemed to shine brighter in the sunlight. "Don't be afraid," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the air with an otherworldly resonance. It didn't sound quite human, yet the words were unmistakable. "We mean you no harm." Elliot opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a barely audible whisper. What are you?" The woman smiled again, her lips curling slightly. "We are not from your world. But we have been here for a long time, watching, learning." Elliot's mind raced, struggling to make sense of what he was hearing. "But you're not human." "No," she replied, her voice gentle. "We are not human, but we are like you in many ways." Elliot felt a strange mix of fear and wonder. Who are you?" "My name is Tessa," she said. "This is Kaler," she gestured toward the large figure standing next to her, his broad shoulders and towering presence unmistakable. "And this is Leary," she pointed to the third figure, a smaller, more agile being who moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost unnatural. Kaler gave a slow, respectful nod in Elliot's direction. His features were sharp, with glowing tattoos running down his arms, and his eyes held a quiet intensity. Leary, on the other hand, was constantly shifting, his movements quick and precise, like a predator watching its surroundings. "We've been living here," Tessa continued, observing, blending in, "but we never thought we would encounter someone like you." Elliot's mind was spinning. The river, the glowing figures, he had no idea what to think. Were they some sort of advanced beings from another planet? Or were they something else entirely? His heart raced, but his curiosity overpowered his fear. "Why are you here?" he asked, barely able to form the words. "We came to Earth because our world is gone," Tessa said. "We had no choice but to leave. And now we are here to study, to understand, to survive." Elliot stood there, motionless, as the weight of her words settled in. These beings were refugees, fugitives from a world that no longer existed. He could hardly comprehend it. Before he could say anything else, Tessa extended her hand toward him, her eyes locked onto his. "We mean you no harm. You are safe with us." Elliot hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped forward, unable to resist the strange pull of her presence. This was no dream. This was real, and he was standing face to face with something he never thought possible. I'm Elliot," he said, his voice still shaky. "I don't understand, but I want to help. I want to learn." Tessa's smile deepened. "That's all we ask." And with that, the world around him seemed to shift. There was no turning back now. Elliot could hardly believe what was happening. Just a few hours ago, he had been an ordinary man, living in his quiet new house, unaware of anything beyond the peaceful town and the river. Now, standing before him were three beings who weren't human. He still couldn't wrap his mind around it. They looked like people, but their glowing skin, their otherworldly eyes, and the strange, graceful way they moved, none of it made sense. And yet here they were. After Tessa had introduced herself and her companions, she invited Elliot to follow them to their hidden home. Without thinking, his curiosity won out, and he agreed to go with them. Maybe he could get some answers. Maybe he would finally understand what they were doing here, why they were on Earth, and what their purpose was. Tessa led the way, walking effortlessly across the riverbank. Kaler, the towering figure, followed closely behind, his long stride cutting through the thick grass. Leary, the swift one, darted ahead and back almost like a shadow, always a few steps ahead of the others. They were completely at ease, as though they had been walking these woods for centuries. For them, this wasn't an unfamiliar place. It was their home. Elliot, on the other hand, felt out of place, awkward in his own skin. He was just an ordinary man, a man who worked with computers, who had lived his life surrounded by concrete and glass. Now, he was walking with beings who had powers beyond anything he had ever imagined. He couldn't stop himself from asking questions, the most pressing one on his mind. "Where are you from?" Tessa, without missing a beat, answered him in that calm, melodic voice that seemed to echo in his mind as much as it did in the air. "Our home is far from here. It's a planet called Eldara. We've been there for eons, but it is gone now, destroyed." Elliot looked at her, his mind racing. "Destroyed? How?" Kaler, the quiet one, finally spoke. His deep voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Our people made mistakes. We were too proud, too greedy. We tried to conquer other worlds, expand our empire. We ignored the warning signs, and when the time came, it was too late. Eldara was torn apart by the very technology we created to rule the stars. The planet cracked under its own weight." Tessa gave Kaler a soft glance as if silently thanking him for speaking. Then she turned back to Elliot. "We were among the last to leave. Many didn't make it. The ships you saw in the sky, they're searching for us." Elliot's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen any ships in the sky yet, but the thought of them sent a chill down his spine. "Who's searching for you?" "A faction of our people," Tessa said, her eyes darkening. "The ones who stayed behind when the destruction began. They are still alive, somewhere out there. They think they can still reclaim what's left of Eldara and rebuild. But their ways are ruthless. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Elliot felt a surge of sympathy for them, these strange, displaced beings who had been forced from their home, their world. He could see the pain in Tessa's eyes, in the way Kaler's jaw tightened when he spoke of their past. He had never imagined anything like this, the reality of a lost civilization, a people torn apart by their own ambition. And yet here they were, trying to make a life on a planet that wasn't their own. As they walked deeper into the woods, the scenery began to change. The trees grew taller, their trunks wider, and the air smelled different. It was heavier, tinged with the scent of something unfamiliar, something alive in a way that Earth had never been for Elliot. The strange glow that had surrounded Tessa, Kaler, and Leary seemed to intensify, illuminating the path ahead. Soon they reached a clearing, and Elliot's eyes widened as he took in what lay before him. It was a hidden valley, surrounded by high cliffs, the kind of place you'd only find in the most remote corners of the world. At the center of the valley was a small, crystal-clear lake, its waters shimmering with a strange energy. Around the lake were structures, but they weren't like anything Elliot had seen before. They were tall, sleek buildings made from materials that seemed to glow in the dim light. They weren't metal, but something else, something organic, almost as if the structures had grown from the earth itself. "This is where we live," Tessa said, her voice full of quiet pride. "We've built this place over the years, learning from the planet, adapting to it. It's not much, but it's home." Elliot stood there, his mouth slightly open, trying to take it all in. "This is amazing," he whispered. Leary, who had been darting around the area, came to a stop next to him. "It's not just a home," he said with a mischievous grin. "It's a sanctuary, a place where we can survive." Tessa nodded. "We've been here for decades, keeping to ourselves. But now, with the danger growing, we need help. We can't hide forever. So, we've decided to trust you, Elliot." Elliot's heart thudded in his chest. He had no idea what they wanted from him, but he knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. "What do you need me to do?" Tessa looked at him seriously. "We need you to help us prepare. The faction searching for us isn't just looking for us. They're looking for a way to use our knowledge to take control of the technology we have. They'll stop at nothing to get it. We need someone who can blend into human society, someone who can gather information, stay under the radar." Elliot's mind raced. "You want me to spy for you? I'm just a regular guy. I don't know anything about this, whatever this is." Kaler's eyes met his, and there was an understanding in them, a quiet acknowledgement of Elliot's fear. "You may be ordinary to you, Elliot, but you have something that we don't have, knowledge of human society. You understand how people think, how they act. We've been hiding for too long, and we need someone who can move in the shadows, someone who can uncover what's really going on in the world. Elliot felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was a lot more than he had signed up for. He had just wanted peace, to live quietly in his new home. But now, his life had been thrust into something he couldn't possibly have imagined. These beings were asking him to help them, to play a part in something that felt so far beyond his understanding. But then he looked at them, at Tessa, with her quiet strength, Kaler with his deep scars and wisdom, and Leary, who seemed to embody the very idea of freedom. They had lost everything, their world, their people, and now they were trying to rebuild. They weren't asking for his help out of weakness, they were asking because they had no choice, and for some reason Elliot found himself wanting to help them. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady, even though his heart was racing. "I'll help you. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll try." Tessa's smile returned, softer this time. "Thank you, Elliot, we knew we could trust you." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the valley, Elliot stood there with his new companions, ready to step into a world he never knew existed. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. The days that followed were unlike anything Elliot had ever experienced. He had expected peace and quiet in the small town, but now he found himself thrust into a world he could hardly believe. His new neighbors were not just alien in appearance, they were alien in every sense of the word. Tessa, Kaler, and Leary weren't just living in hiding, they were preparing for something big. Elliot spent his days with them, learning their ways, their technology, and their culture. Every time he thought he was starting to understand, they would reveal something new, something even more unbelievable than before. Despite the growing sense of danger, there was something strangely comforting about their presence. They weren't just refugees, they were survivors. And somehow, Elliot felt he was part of their survival now. Tessa, who had quickly become the group's leader, took it upon herself to teach Elliot how to use their technology. At first, it seemed beyond him. The glowing tablets they used, the shimmering devices that floated in midair, all of it felt so distant from anything he had ever known. But Tessa was patient. She explained things simply, showing him how to interface with the alien tech. It wasn't so much about machines as it was about energy. The devices responded to thought, to intent. And as strange as it was, Elliot could sense that the technology was alive in its own way, almost symbiotic. "What you see," Tessa said one day as she demonstrated a glowing, floating orb that hovered before them, "isn't a machine in the way you think. It's an extension of us. Eldarans, our people, could communicate with the technology through our minds, our energy. It's part of us." Elliot marveled at the way the orb glided around them, responding to Tessa's subtle gestures. It was like the device was alive, following her every command without a word being spoken. "How do you do that?" he asked, still amazed. "It's not easy," she replied with a small smile. "It requires focus, practice, but with time you learn to connect with it. In our world, the technology wasn't just for convenience, it was part of our way of life." Elliot, unsure whether he would ever master such an art, tried to focus on the orb. He reached out tentatively, willing the orb to move. At first, nothing happened. Then, to his surprise, the orb began to shift slightly, hovering just an inch higher. His heart raced and he tried to concentrate harder, but the orb quickly dropped back down. Tessa noticed his frustration and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're trying too hard. It's not about forcing it, it's about understanding the flow. The technology is intuitive. You have to allow it to respond, not control it." Elliot nodded, though he wasn't sure how to allow something like this. It felt impossible. Meanwhile, Kaler spent his time teaching Elliot other lessons, lessons in survival and combat. Though Kaler was a giant of a man, he moved with surprising grace. His combat techniques were all based on precision, control, and speed, despite his imposing stature. Every day, he put Elliot through drills in the woods, teaching him how to track, how to move silently, how to defend himself. He even showed him some basic hand-to-hand techniques, though Elliot was far from mastering them. "You need to learn how to defend yourself," Kaler told him one morning as they practiced near the river. "The faction that's hunting us, they are not just looking for us, they want our knowledge. They'll stop at nothing to find us, to use us." Elliot wiped sweat from his brow, exhausted but determined. "How do you fight something like that?" "You fight with everything you have," Kaler answered. "You use the terrain, your surroundings, and most importantly, your mind. The greatest weapon is not your fists but your ability to think ahead, to anticipate." Elliot listened carefully, taking in every word. He wasn't sure how much of it would sink in, but he knew that what they were preparing for was real. The alien faction that had once been a distant threat was no longer distant. The signs were everywhere. The first sign came when Elliot noticed strange patterns in the sky. At first they seemed like ordinary clouds, but after a few days he saw them again. Small, metallic shapes, moving silently against the backdrop of the sky. They were too fast to be planes, too strange to be anything normal. Tessa noticed them too. She had grown tense in the days that followed, her usual calm demeanor slipping. "They've found us," she murmured one evening as they stood together by the edge of the valley. "They're closer than we thought." Elliot had never seen Tessa so concerned. The once serene and confident woman seemed almost afraid. It was a strange feeling to see one of the most powerful beings he had ever known so vulnerable. "We have to prepare," she said. "We have to move before they make their move." Kaler nodded, his expression hardening. "We need to gather what we can, gather allies if we can, and get ready. We won't be able to hide forever." Leary, who had been unusually quiet in recent days, suddenly spoke up. "We'll need help. Earth isn't just a hiding place for us anymore. If they find us, they'll want to take everything, our technology, our knowledge. And if we're going to fight back, we need to learn more about Earth's defenses." Elliot felt a knot form in his stomach. "You want me to go back to the town, to the people? You want me to get information for you?" "Yes," Tessa said, her voice firm. "You know human society better than we do. You understand how they think, how they operate. We need you to gather information, everything you can about military movements, about any unusual activities, anything that could help us." Elliot felt the weight of her words. He had no idea how he could do this. He wasn't a spy, he wasn't some kind of hero. He was just a man who wanted to live a quiet life. But now he had no choice. The aliens were right. The threat was real, and if he didn't help them, he might be putting the entire planet in danger. The next few days were filled with tense preparations. They moved quickly, gathering supplies, hiding their alien technology deeper within the valley, and fortifying their position. It wasn't long before Elliot noticed that the air around them seemed to hum with anticipation. They were all preparing for something, something big. Tessa, Kaler, and Leary were ready to fight, but Elliot was still unsure if he could ever be ready for what was coming. As he sat in the clearing one night, looking up at the stars, he couldn't help but think about his life before all of this. It seemed like a lifetime ago, his job in the city, his small apartment, his quiet weekends. Now everything was different. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He was part of something much larger than himself. He had never asked for this. He never wanted to be part of an intergalactic conflict. But standing with Tessa, Kaler, and Leary, he realized that he couldn't turn his back on them. They had trusted him, and in a strange way, they had become his new family. He couldn't abandon them now. The next morning, as dawn broke over the valley, Tessa called them together. "It's time," she said. "We can't wait any longer. The faction is coming. We have to be ready." Elliot took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew that the stakes were higher than ever before. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for the survival of the people he had come to care for. And maybe, just maybe, for the survival of Earth itself. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elliot had no choice but to stand with them, no matter what. The day the first wave arrived, the sky was thick with clouds. Elliot had never seen anything like it. The way the air felt charged, as if something was about to break. The whole valley seemed to hold its breath. The calm that had settled over their secluded haven for so many years was gone, replaced by an eerie tension. The quiet, peaceful life he'd imagined was slipping away, and now it was time to fight. Tessa, Kaler, and Leary stood together, their eyes focused on the distant mountains. Their expressions were grave, but there was no fear in them, only determination. The time for hiding was over. The aliens were here, and they weren't going to back down. Elliot stood a few steps away, his hands trembling as he gripped a small device Tessa had given him earlier. It looked like nothing more than a smooth, metallic orb, but Tessa had told him it was one of their communication tools, something that would help them stay in contact during the coming conflict. He wasn't sure how it worked, but he trusted her. At that moment, he realized he didn't know how to feel. He was scared, yes, but he also felt something else, purpose. He had made a choice. He couldn't walk away now, not after everything they'd shared. "Stay close," Tessa said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "If the faction comes too close, we'll need to split up. It's our only chance. We can't let them catch us all together." Kaler nodded. He didn't speak much, but the weight of his presence was enough. The strength he exuded seemed to have no end, and Elliot found himself looking to the large figure for reassurance. Despite his calm, though, Kaler was ready. He had been training them for days, preparing them for this moment. Leary, as always, was the most restless. He paced back and forth, his movements quick and precise, like a predator preparing to strike. "I don't like waiting," he muttered. "We should be moving." Elliot couldn't agree more. He felt trapped in the valley, as though they were sitting ducks, waiting for something they couldn't control. The alien ships that had been hovering over the valley in the days leading up to this moment hadn't been spotted recently. But he knew they were out there, watching. They were too close for comfort. Then, without warning, the sky split open. A flash of light streaked across the clouds, and Elliot's heart skipped a beat. He'd heard about alien technology, but nothing had prepared him for this. The ships weren't like anything he had seen in movies or read about in books. They didn't resemble the typical flying saucers. They were sleek, triangular, and dark, blending seamlessly with the clouds above them. There were dozens of them, their metallic surfaces gleaming in the dim light, as though they had been waiting for this moment too. "They're here," Tessa whispered, barely audible. Elliot felt a chill crawl up his spine. He could hear the faint hum of the ships, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath him. His muscles tensed, and his instincts screamed at him to run, to hide. But Tessa's words echoed in his mind. "We can't hide forever." As the ships descended, they moved in a formation, circling above the valley like vultures. It was clear they were searching for something or someone. Tessa turned to Elliot, her eyes locking with his. There was no time for words, only action. "Get to the comm device," she said, her voice sharp. "Send the signal when we're ready. We need backup." Elliot nodded, his hands shaking as he adjusted the device. He wasn't sure what kind of backup they were expecting, but he knew it was their only hope. He had to trust that the plan would work, even if it felt like they were stepping into the unknown. Kaler moved first. He was like a shadow, moving silently but with deadly precision. His every step seemed calculated, as though he knew exactly where to be and when. He disappeared into the trees, his large form blending in with the shadows. Leary followed, his movements quick and fluid, already scouting ahead, looking for any signs of danger. Tessa stayed with Elliot, her eyes constantly scanning the sky and the surrounding woods. She was a strategist at heart, always thinking several steps ahead. "You stay here," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We need to know what they're planning." Elliot felt the weight of the moment. The air was thick, and the hum of the ships above seemed to reverberate in his chest. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the ships began to lower, their massive forms almost touching the treetops. Elliot's heart pounded as he adjusted the device again, his fingers pressing against the smooth surface. He didn't know if they would hear it, but he had to try. He pressed a button and a small light blinked on the device. It was working. "Stay hidden," Tessa murmured, her voice barely audible. "We're not ready yet. We can't let them know we're here." Elliot watched, his breath held as the ships finally touched down. There was no sound, just a deep, vibrating hum as the ships settled into the forest. The trees around them seemed to bend slightly, as though the very presence of the ships was shifting the air around them. Tessa's eyes narrowed and she held up her hand, signaling for silence. She turned to Elliot. "They've landed. It's time." Elliot didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew that, for better or worse, this was the moment that would define everything. The device in his hand vibrated again and a soft beep sounded from it. Backup. The signal had gone through. Almost immediately, there was a flash of light in the distance, followed by a deep rumble that shook the ground beneath them. Elliot's stomach lurched as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was war. The backup arrived in the form of strange, glowing beings, figures who emerged from the shadows of the valley. They weren't human, not like Tessa, Kaler, and Leary. These beings were like them, but different. They were smaller, their forms delicate but somehow strong. Their skin shimmered with colors Elliot couldn't describe, as though they were made of light. He had no idea who they were, but they were here to help. Tessa's eyes flashed with recognition when she saw them. "The Eldarin allies," she whispered. "They came." Elliot watched as Tessa and the Eldarin allies spoke in rapid, alien language. They were exchanging information, discussing strategy, but Elliot couldn't understand a word. It was all happening so fast. The ships above them were not idle, though. The enemy faction was preparing for their next move. Kaler emerged from the trees, his massive form moving quickly. He joined Tessa, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. "They're moving toward the valley entrance. We need to stop them now." Elliot's stomach twisted. He felt completely out of his depth, but then something inside him clicked. He wasn't just a spectator, he was part of this. He had made his choice and now he had to see it through. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady. Tessa turned to him, her face full of resolve. "Keep the communication line open. If anything goes wrong, you need to warn us. You'll be our eyes and ears." Elliot nodded. He didn't know if he was ready for this, but he knew one thing. There was no going back now. The valley was about to become the battleground for the survival of an entire species, and maybe, just maybe, the fate of Earth itself. The ground beneath them shook again as the first blasts rang out, the clash of alien technology filling the air. The battle had begun. Elliot tightened his grip on the device, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew that whatever it was, it would change everything. For better or worse, the future of this world, his world, was in motion, and there was no turning back.